Did you know Rod Serling did not want to host The Twilight Zone? Little known secrets from wife Carol Serling next on Sci-Fi Buzz. You've switched on Sci-Fi Buzz, where this week we're bound to please resin heads by buzzing with Randy Bowen. Some best bets coming to theater screens this summer. American New Wave author Roger Zelazny. And some inside stories from The Twilight Zone.
He was very nervous in the beginning, which is how he developed that sort of strange, through the teeth, you know, kind of presentation.
All right, you fans of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, you've come to the right place. This is Sci-Fi Central, the nerd center of the Sci-Fi channel. Oh, I did say nerd, didn't I? Actually, it's supposed to be nerve. They told me not to hire a writer from the Family Channel. Actually, nerd works for these people, actually. We have a lot going on Sci-Fi Buzz today, including the latest from Harlan Ellison.
Times is tough for writers. You just don't know how it is. In addition to having a steadily more illiterate audience every year, I mean, that is to say, people who don't read books, people who have forgotten the past to the extent that nostalgia becomes what they had for breakfast, we have this thing called political correctness. Now, in the world of science fiction, writers have to pay attention to what's going on around them, because science fiction is the only 100% hopeful fiction. That is to say, inherent in the form is, there will be a tomorrow. If you read a science fiction story, it says, this will happen tomorrow. Now, that's very positive. It's very pragmatic. We'll be here tomorrow. We may be unhappy. We may be all living like maggots, but we'll be here. So that means it's 100% positive. Artistic freedom, thus, becomes something that might be a little troublesome, because we deal in allegory, because we deal in the ideas that are not exactly what they are today, but they seem to be about something that we know today, and yet they're tomorrow's idea. The Jesse Helmses of the world, the Phyllis Schlaflys of the world, the Pat Buchanans of the world, the skinheads of the world find science fiction very, very, very troubling. And they want you to be politically correct. That is to say, you are not allowed to insult anyone. You can't have a character who's an unpleasant woman. You can't have an unpleasant person who has a deformity. Everybody has to be terrific. Let me tell you a story. This truly happened. A few years ago, I got a letter. I get a lot of mail. As a writer of Matters Fantastic and as a critic of the field, I get a lot of mail. And they're filled with opinions. Everybody has opinions. I have them, you have them. And we are all told from the moment we open our eyes that everyone is entitled to his or her opinion. Well, that's horsepucky, of course. We are not entitled to our opinions. We are entitled to our informed opinions. Without research, without background, without understanding, it's nothing. It's just bibble-babble. It's like a fart in a wind tunnel, folks. So I get opinions. And I get a letter one day from a guy, we'll call him Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Johnson says, "You are always writing stories in which midgets are villains." Now, footnote here. When you get one of these letters, they don't say something rational like, "In this story you did it," or "that story you did it." It's always, "You always did it." So I went back through 1,100 published stories. I found 2 stories with midgets in them. One of them was the hero. So this guy writes me and he says, "I am 3 foot tall and we don't like being called midgets. We like being called little people." Well, I thought about this letter for a while, this political correctness being a problem, and I really am concerned about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it. And finally, I wrote him back a letter, and I said, "Dear Mr. Johnson, I am 5'5". I'm a little person. You're a midget."
This is John Callahan from Morganton, North Carolina, and I like to recommend the new novel from the author of The Guns of the South, Harry Turtledove. The new novel is called World War in the Balance. This time, the alternate history takes place in World War II, and while the Axis and Allied powers are fighting it out, aliens show up. It's perhaps a little less serious than Guns of the South, but it's still very enlightening and, above all, very entertaining book.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination.
Fans of TV's revered series, The Twilight Zone, are in for a big treat this week. CBS will pay tribute to the show's creator and host, Rod Serling, with Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Lost Classics. The two surreal dramas are based on works found by Serling's wife, Carol, long after his death.
Excuse me. What are you seeing? What?
Talk to you later.
Do you see me up there?
Serling wrote almost 2/3 of the Twilight Zone scripts. According to Carol Serling, Rod was an extremely disciplined workaholic.
Usually when he was doing Twilight Zone, he'd work in the morning. I'd get up very early, grab a cup of coffee, pack of cigarettes, and go to work until about 12 or 1, and then he'd go over to the studio and be involved in the production end of it. He managed to take some time off, but not a lot. I think his mind was always, you know, on the next story.
Jeremy Wheaton was a most inquisitive man.
He had a wonderful imagination. You know, things that would happen to you or to me, we'd say, gee, that was interesting. But, you know, if something happened to him, he could weave it into a story. I mean, just an unbelievable imagination.
Rod often said he didn't choose to become a writer, he succumbed to it. And under the guise of science fiction and fantasy, The Twilight Zone gave Serling the form he needed to vent the swirl of emotions that were constantly churning within him.
So much of what he wrote was because he did want to comment on social conditions and so on and so forth, which is really, I think, in the Twilight Zone, he was able to do that. You know, he'd had so much trouble getting the shows that he'd written on. I mean, people were emasculating them and just making it very difficult. So escaping into the Twilight Zone, he could comment on social issues and really didn't have a lot of trouble with the censors.
Serling did have other troubles, however, and one of them was dealing with success. As the host of The Twilight Zone, Rod became a celebrity. The crush of autograph-seeking fans made his wife and 2 daughters uncomfortable, to the point of not wanting to go out in public with him. Ironically, Rod never intended to become an on-screen personality.
They originally wanted Orson Welles, and Orson Welles was in England, and he was also too expensive. So I guess they just kind of looked around and said, here's Rod, let's try him. But he was very nervous in the beginning, which is how he developed that sort of strange, through-the-teeth, you know, kind of presentation.
It's 20-odd years since Pearl Harbor, but 2 ancient opponents are moving into position for a battle in an attic.
Like the Twilight Zone shows of 30 years ago, these newly produced stories find ordinary people pulled into another dimension to face life's most perplexing and horrific realities. According to his wife, the man who created these bizarre scenarios was anything but bizarre.
I don't want to disappoint you, but he was a very normal sort of person. I mean, he had the same hobbies and the same interests, although he always loved science fiction.
The king of models, not Hugh Hefner. I'm talking about Randy Bowen. Next. Here at Sci-Fi Buzz, we call some of our staff members resin heads because they're so into collecting models. But we love them anyway. You know, you do have to have compassion for the possessed. In fact, these 2 guys think that Randy Bowen should be president. You hardcore model builders out there know that Randy Bowen is the foremost model sculptor on the planet. His sculptures are among the most popular and highly acclaimed models ever produced. Though much of his work is for Dark Horse Comics, where he oversees the model department, Randy also creates monsters, superheroes, and super babes for many of the other model companies. But your wife posed for that Linda Blair model there?
Well, yes. My word.
You know, she did. Never met your wife, and I don't believe I want to. Recently, I ran into Randy at the Mad Model Party. I seized the opportunity to find out how this guy rose to the top of his craft to become the Sultan of Sculpting, the King of Clay, the Potentate of Putty. My first question was, how much training have you had?
Really none. I'd played around a little bit in high school, and I played with clay when I was, 6 years old in my grandmother's house, but it's pretty much self-taught.
I played with clay when I was a kid, too, and I can't even mold a meatball. So you figure Randy must have built a lot of models as a kid, right? Not so.
We were pretty poor growing up, so I usually tried to, go to the kid down the street who was building models, and occasionally I'd be able to save up enough money to buy something. But I think this is why I'm having so much fun now, is because I couldn't afford them as a kid, so now I get to make my own, and everybody else is, painting things that I've sculpted or created.
Randy's childhood passions were monster movies, cartoons, and comics. Because of his family's poverty, he developed a knack for building his own toys.
I didn't have the store-bought variety, store purchase variety, so I was forced to entertain myself drawing and creating things out of clay and wood. My father was a shoe cobbler, and so he had all these great grinders and things, and so I would spend my time after school working in his store, making things with my hands and just entertain myself, basically.
But how long can you go without wanting to get back to the models?
Oh, I'm constantly, my hands are always busy doing either drawing or painting or something, I don't know.
When he grew up, Randy decided to become an illustrator. He says he moved to California thinking he was Joe Cool Artist, only to discover he was one of thousands of Joe Cool artists. He fell into sculpting when a friend needed some help creating a line of fantasy figurines. But Randy found his dream job one day while reading a magazine.
I saw an ad in a magazine, somebody needed a monster to be sculpted, and I'm there, If I can sculpt a monster and get paid for it, all the better.
Sculpting models, Randy not only indulges his lifelong love of monsters, but he's found what he calls a great little niche.
To be honest, there's less competition. There's tons of really talented illustrators, but not as many sculptors. And if you're good, you get called upon by a lot of big companies to work on their projects.
With work from the model companies coming left and right, Randy Bowen definitely has his hands full.
What do you do to relax?
I sculpt.
Kate Koplovitz, please. Don't forget that the Buzzboard line is open 24 hours a day, 213-851-7235. Call us with your recommendations on your favorite books, videos, software, games, whatever. We might put you on the air here at Sci-Fi Buzz, and you'll have your 15 seconds of fame, huh? Now, who'd you want to call? Home?
My name's Heather Green from Prince Edward Island, Canada. I'd like to recommend a trilogy of books by John Varley called Titan, Wizard, and Demon. If you like sci-fi and fantasy, it's a great combination of both. These are older books, and I found mine in a used bookstore, but they are absolutely great.
After a long, frigid winter, things are finally heating up, especially on the big screen. We'll take a peek at the cream of the genre crop on this week's Buzz Best Bets. Fred, Wilma, Barney, Betty, and the rest of the Bedrock Bunch will bring their Stone Age style of fun to theaters on May 27th. This live-action version of the enormously popular cartoon series is packed with state-of-the-art visual effects and puppets from Jim Henson's Creature Shop. Following on the heels of the Flintstones is Disney's latest animated spectacle, The Lion King. This story of a lion cub forced into exile by an evil uncle is Disney's first animated feature to be based on original material. Top talent like Jeremy Irons and James Earl Jones lent their voices to the project, and Elton John helped write the score. The Lion King roars into select theaters on June 15th. Jack Nicholson sinks his teeth into the lead role of the supernatural thriller Wolf. A werewolf tale for the 90s, the film follows a book editor whose life is transformed after he encounters an unusual beast on a lonely road. Just to catch Nicholson in monstrous makeup, compliments of Rick Baker is worth the price of a ticket. Baker's wolfish wizardry was previously seen in An American Werewolf in London. Wolf slinks into theaters on June 17th. On July 1st, we'll find out what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The Shadow will show us as he battles bad guys like Shiwan Khan, the last descendant of Genghis Khan. Based on the radio series that ran for 18 years, The Shadow is considered to be the first superhero.
Somebody Please stop me!
Wrapping up our sneak preview of Summer Sizzlers is The Mask. Wacky comic James Carey stars in this visual effects stunner as an ordinary bank clerk whose fortunes change dramatically when he discovers an ancient mask with supernatural powers. So start stashing that cash, buzzers, because this summer, the theaters of America will be filled with thrills, chills, and good times. Those are this week's Buzz Best Bets.
One of sci-fi and fantasy's top authors, Rod Serling, next.
This is Kevin Rush from Oceanside, California, and I'm calling about Star Wars, the radio drama. It was originally done in 1981 for National Public Radio. It is 6.5 hours long and includes original sound effects and stars Mark Hamill. It is really good because it expands on the original movie and fills in a lot of the background information for Luke Skywalker and also his family. It is available on both compact disc and cassettes from Highbridge Audio.
No question about it, our very own Harlan Ellison is a member of the American New Wave, just like Roger Zelazny. Wouldn't you say that's true, Susan? Huh?
Oh, great. So you can't say my name. You get Roger Zelazny's name right, but you can't say my name.
I've been practicing his name, Roger.
They're definitely a part of the New Wave, along with Samuel R. Delaney. Back in the 60s, when they were all just coming to prominence, somebody coined that phrase, American New Wave. And as Zelazny told us recently, it all has to do with stream of consciousness writing.
There are authors who have a knack for weaving tales of aliens and androids. Others excel at myth and magic. But Roger Zelazny is one of the few who have been hailed as a master of both science fiction and fantasy. This highly prolific writer began to plot a literary career as a youngster in Cleveland. And like any dedicated artist, he was prepared to pay his dues and collect a pile of rejection slips.
As luck would have it, I started writing in near the end of February of '62, and I sold my first story around the end of March of '62. And I took that as a good omen and kept writing science fiction.
Zelazny's first sci-fi novel, This Immortal, won him a Hugo Award a few years later. It's worth noting that the author never intended to limit his work to science fiction and fantasy. But once his writing style began to take shape, the advantages of genre storytelling couldn't be ignored.
For one thing, you write about characters of a sort you can't write about in general fiction. I mean, where else can you write about characters who are on par with, say, figures in the Iliad and the Odyssey and Greek tragedies or Elizabethan plays? I mean, figures who are larger than life. We want something like a god, and we don't want to be theological about it. We can bring in an alien or an artificial intelligence.
In two recent collaborations with author Bob Sheckley, Zelazny borrows legendary literary characters like Prince Charming and Faust for a great millennial contest between good and evil.
It's intended to be both, on the one hand, light, and on the other hand, to look at some ideas that we think stimulate thinking.
The authors are currently at work on a third and final chapter to the philosophical fantasy series. Zelazny obviously enjoys working with other writers, but it's unlikely the fruits of their labor will bear any resemblance to his solo projects.
You don't want to do the same sort of thing time after time where you get in a rut. These books are very different than anything either one of us wrote, which I think is the justification for doing a collaboration in the first place, to produce something neither one of you would have done on your own.
Among Zelazny's most popular works are what have come to be called the Amber novels. Readers have found the squabbling siblings in a superpowered royal family irresistible. These stories from the series Amber, the One Real World, have spawned computer and role-playing games, a fanzine, choose-your-own-adventure books, and the series has been optioned for a possible feature film.
I am a very visual writer. I describe everything in I think, fairly vivid detail. And anyone in a medium where this sort of representation was important would have an easy time, I think, transposing the work from prose into their medium, so that may well have something to do with it.
In the crowded field of science fiction and fantasy writing, Roger Zelazny's uncanny ability to turn out fresh and diverse material keeps him in a class by himself. On the cutting edge this week, smart cars, like a car that parks itself, and you don't even have to be in the vehicle, and a car that tells you how to get where you're going.
Take exit on the left to Interstate 4 Freeway West.
How's that for backseat driving? But the reason we want to show you these vehicles is not because of their funny pictures or voices. It's because the technology at work here will bring us major driving advances, say, 10 years down the road. Meet the self-parking car from Volkswagen. If this feature was available right now, the sticker price would go up $3,000, so who needs it? But the sensor technology at work here is what's special. It continually measures your distance from other vehicles. A decade from now, that same technology will help us avoid freeway collisions. Meanwhile, in Orlando, Florida, General Motors' TravTech dashboard-mounted navigator is being tested. When you start driving, you can see where you are on the map, you can see how far you have to go, and when you should get ready to turn. You'll also hear voice directions when your turn comes up. Now, if there's congestion ahead, TravTech gives you advance warning. In the near future, your car could have this satellite navigational system. In, say, a decade or two, the Volkswagen steering sensor system, combined with GM's Traveler Information System and an onboard PC, could create an automatic chauffeured vehicle. Your car will pick you up and take you at high speed with a pack of other cars to your preset destination while you sleep or read the newspaper. The technology is already being developed. The future is about to happen.
Speaking of imaginative futures, make sure you check out the FTL newsfeed every day right here on the Sci-Fi channel. How about those edible plates and utensils?
It's the world's first truly complete meal. Everything's edible. We call it great taste with no waste.
And who's afraid of the future with that to look forward to, huh?
Hey, Mike, let's go.
Okay, just got to finish up here. The staff and I are heading over to meet Marina Sirtis. She's hosting this special on the Sci-Fi channel next week. It's basically a farewell to the next generation. And I want to give her some tips on how to host a show here on the Sci-Fi channel. Actually, I want her autograph. See you next week.
What happened at the 25th Space Symposium? Why is there a black hole in Miami Space Coast Stadium? Inside Space tells you tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern. Now stay tuned for Mysteries from Beyond the Other Dominion. Next.